She was on her knees in the dirt of his porch, begging a stranger not to send her back to the people who had left her to die. Elias Ward would remember that moment for the rest of his life, not because a woman had never begged him for anything before, but because of what happened 3 weeks later, when the same tribe that cast her out rode back to the ranch with 50 warriors and a demand nobody expected. It started with blood in the dust. Elias saw her from 50 yards out, a shape too still to be alive and too broken to be anything but human. He didn't think. He rode. Up close she was Apache, tall, her frame corded with muscle under a crust of dried blood and red dust. Whip welts crossed her shoulders in dark purple ridges. Rope had cut deep grooves into her wrists. Her chest rose and fell in small, uneven pulls, like her body couldn't decide whether it was worth the effort anymore. He dropped from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. Heat rippled off the ground in waves, but the cold thought hit him first. This could be a trap. The Apache had warned him before, more than once, to stay off land that wasn't his business. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat anyway. Her pulse fluttered under his hand, faint as a moth against glass. If he left her, the sun would finish what the whip had started. He cut her bindings, hauled her over his shoulder, heavier than she looked, all muscle and no give, and slung her across his saddle. "Damn it," he muttered, and kicked the horse into a run. Dust rose behind them like smoke. If anyone was watching from the ridge, they'd know exactly whose side he'd just chosen. There would be no walking that back. He rode for the cabin like the devil was on his heels. Inside, he laid her on a blanket by the hearth and got the fire going. He scooped the last of the water from the tank, every drop precious in a drought like this, and used it to clean the blood and dust from her face. Her pulse was still there. Faint, but there. Elias hadn't gone looking for anyone's trouble in years. Disease had taken his wife and both his sons a while back, and since then he'd lived like a ghost on his own land, tending cattle, staying clear of town, clear of people, clear of anything that could cost him again. What he'd done tonight undid all of that in one motion. This woman wasn't like the others he'd glimpsed from a distance. Her arms were thick with muscle, her shoulders built like a warrior's. The whip marks told their own story, a punishment and a brutal one. Whatever she'd done, or whatever they'd decided she'd done, the tribe would call this an act of war if they found out he'd taken her in. Outside, night dropped fast, and the wind hissed sand through the gaps in the cabin walls. Elias fed the fire and sat beside her, rifle within reach, his gray eyes fixed on the door. He knew the kind of men who left a woman to die in the desert. He knew they might come back to finish it. If they did, he'd be standing right here. He must have dozed, because a rustle of movement snapped him upright. She was already sitting bolt upright, eyes wide and wild, a kitchen knife in her hand, snatched up before he'd even seen her move. Firelight caught the blade. Elias didn't flinch. He raised both hands, slow, and kept his voice low. "If you're going to stab me, make it clean. If you want to live, put it down." She was breathing hard, sweat beading at her hairline, eyes cutting around the small room. Not a cell, not a cage. Just a man, tall and unshaven, steady in a way that unsettled her more than any threat could have. "I cut your ropes," he said. "You want to leave, that door's open. But there's nothing out there but sand and vultures." The knife trembled. After a long moment, she let it fall, and her whole body folded with it, like something inside her had finally been given permission to stop holding itself up. Elias picked up the blade, then handed her the last bowl of water. "Drink. You need it more than I do." She drank slow, watching him over the rim the entire time, like she was still waiting for the trap to spring. When she finished, Elias walked out to the porch, sat with the rifle across his knees, and stayed there. Through the doorway, she watched his silhouette hold still against the moonlight, smoke curling from a cigarette he barely seemed to smoke. She didn't sleep that night. Every time the nightmares came for her, she opened her eyes and found him still there, not coming in, not leaving either. Something stirred in her chest that she thought had died out on the sand, something like safety. By the time the sky started to pale, Elias hadn't moved from the step. He turned his head and spoke quietly. You want to stay till you're strong again? You can. You want to go? I won't stop you. Your choice. She didn't answer, but her fingers tightened on the blanket around her shoulders. That was answer enough. By morning, she was on her feet, shoulder bandaged, eyes sharp. Elias was already out mending fence and didn't look up. You're stronger, he said. Water troughs are behind the cattle pen if you want to eat. She said nothing, but she picked up a bucket and went. He watched her haul water with arms that had nearly given out the night before, and felt something close to surprise. That whole day she followed him in silence, watching how he patched wood and mixed mud. By afternoon she'd picked up the hammer without being asked and finished the last of the fence posts herself. Elias stood still a moment, then gave a single nod and let her work. That night she lit the kitchen fire on her own, cooked a rabbit stew, and set it in front of him without a word. He looked at the bowl, then at her, and nodded. It was thanks enough for both of them. The days that followed filled the quiet with sound. Hammers, shovels, wood against wood. Elias dug a new well. She hauled stone for a windbreak with a strength that rebuilt half a fence line in one afternoon. One evening, sitting on the porch, him with a cigarette, her carving a small knife from scrap wood, she finally spoke. Why did you save me? He looked out at the cracked fields a long moment. Couldn't stand to see someone left out there. Seen enough death. She said nothing back, only nodded, and something in her uncoiled. That night, for the first time in months, she slept straight through, while outside his slow footsteps kept circling the homestead like a promise. The peace didn't last. It broke on a golden afternoon, hoofbeats rolling in from the horizon like distant thunder. Elias's head snapped up from the harness he was tightening. Company, he muttered, grabbing the rifle off the porch rail. She heard it too and came to the door, then froze. 3 Apache riders, faces painted for war, eyes like ice, reined up at the fence line. Our woman is here, the lead rider said, flat and cold. Hand her over. She stepped back, hand finding the knife at her hip. Elias moved between her and the riders, rifle steady. She's hurt. She stays until she's healed. That's her right. She was cast out. Another snapped. She has no right to anything. Shelter her, and you're our enemy too. Elias didn't lower the gun. You want to kill someone, you go through me first. The silence stretched tight as a drawn bowstring. Behind him, she watched his shoulders, calm on the surface, coiled to fire underneath. Finally, the lead rider lowered his spear, fury banked behind his eyes. We'll be back, and we won't come alone. They wheeled and rode, leaving a trail of dust and a silence that pressed down on the yard like a held breath. She gripped her knife until her knuckles whitened. They'll come back with more, Elias said. If you're staying, we need to be ready. She nodded, not fear on her face now, but something harder, the will to survive. That night they hauled out every round of ammunition, every sandbag in the shed, and barricaded the windows together. For the first time since he'd found her, she wasn't just a woman he'd saved. She was standing with him by choice. 3 days later, before the sun had fully set, the dust rose again, and this time, it didn't stop at 3 riders. Nearly 20 surrounded the ranch in a tightening circle, the air thick with horse sweat and leather. She tied her hair back and stood with a spear in one hand, a knife in the other, every inch a warrior. An elder came forward, silver-haired, stern as carved stone. His eyes moved from Elias to the woman standing tall behind him. She was cast out. She belongs to the dust. Why do you keep her? Because she's alive, Elias said, and she has the right to choose. A young warrior shouted from the circle. She dishonored the tribe. She cannot be allowed to live. She stepped forward before Elias could answer, her voice carrying like a struck bell. I dishonored no one. I was punished for not bearing children. That is no crime. Silence rippled outward. Even the fire in the young warrior's eyes seemed to waver. The elder studied her. You choose to live under a white man's roof. That severs every tie to this tribe. She planted the butt of her spear in the dirt and nodded. I choose life here. The elder was quiet a long moment before raising his hand. We leave tonight. At dawn, The council returns. If you are still here, you are no longer a daughter of this tribe. His gaze cut to Elias. And you will bear what comes of it. The war party wheeled and vanished into the dusk, hooves fading into silence. When they were gone, Elias lowered his rifle. She stood tall still, chest heaving with each breath. By morning, he said quietly, everything changes. You sure? Her eyes burned into his. I already died once out there. I won't die again. Dawn broke bronze and heavy. Elias was on the porch before the rooster crowed, rifle loaded. Inside, she tightened the bandage on her shoulder, eyes cold as forged steel. A horn sounded low and long, and this time the whole council came, the silver-haired elder, 2 matriarchs with gray-streaked hair, and 50 riders ringing the ranch like a closing fist. She walked out and stood beside Elias now, not behind him. Shoulder to shoulder, morning light caught the half-healed scars across her back. One of the elder women spoke. Taina, daughter of the tribe, we ask you one last time. Do you return to face judgment or choose exile forever? The wind tore through her hair. I will not return, she said, clear and unshaking. I choose life on my own terms, not under a sentence I never deserved. Murmurs moved through the circle, some warriors gripping their spears tighter, others bowing their heads, already letting go. The elder woman gave a slow nod. From this day, your name is struck from the lineage. You will not rest in ancestral ground. But from this day, the tribe will not hunt you either. The old chief's eyes cut to Elias, sharp as a blade's edge. You sheltered her. Her fate is bound to yours now. If blood is spilled for this choice, it stains your hands too. I understand, Elias said, and didn't look away. The moment stretched. A lifetime folded into a few seconds before the elder raised his hand and, one by one, the riders turned and withdrew. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did Taina finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her shoulders shook once, but her eyes were lit with something unbroken. Elias looked at her a long time. You just chose a new life, he said. No, she answered, voice rough but proud. I chose myself. That afternoon the sky broke open. After weeks of drought, the first rain in months hammered the roof, and the smell of wet earth rose up like the whole prairie exhaling. Elias stood on the porch, soaked through, watching the cracked fields drink. Tina stepped out behind him, rain running down muscled arms, hair whipping loose in the wind. Storm's here, he said. She didn't answer. She walked out into it, tilted her face to the sky, and closed her eyes, letting the rain wash away the last of the dust and dried blood, the last of everything she used to be. Elias watched her and understood. This wasn't the broken woman he'd carried in off the desert floor. This was someone whole, a warrior, free. When the rain eased, he walked out and stood beside her. You could still leave, he said. They won't hunt you now. Road south still runs to town. She turned to face him. Is that what you want? He was quiet a long moment, rain sliding down his weathered face. Then he shook his head. No, I think this ranch isn't big enough for just one person anymore. The smile that crossed her face was the first real one since the day he'd found her. They spent the rest of the day working side by side, clearing the yard, turning the softened soil, mending fence in the last of the light. By sundown, the ranch looked different, stronger, cleaner, alive with the smell of new earth. That night they sat by a fire in the yard, watching sparks climb into the dark. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel like a ghost on his own land. Taina settled beside him, a quiet kind of promise between them, and he lit a cigarette and allowed himself something close to a smile. Tomorrow, he said, we build a new horse pen. She nodded, firelight warm on a face that had finally learned what peace looked like. The rain had stopped. All that was left was the smell of wet ground and the feeling that something new had only just begun. We don't get to choose where we're born, but we can choose where we stand. And sometimes standing beside someone means being willing to stand against the whole world for them. That's how a home gets built, not from wood and nails, but from the choice two people make not to walk away.